The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, its crystal walls reflecting the light of 1,000 different suns. Representatives from 200 alien species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, growls, and melodic tones that would have been impossible for human ears to understand without translation devices. Ambassador Krelthax of the Zephyrian Federation stood at the center podium, his blue-scaled form towering over the speaking platform. His golden eyes swept across the assembled delegates as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be the most important speech of his career. The 6 arms of his species moved in careful gestures as he spoke, each movement calculated to show authority and confidence. Fellow members of the Galactic Council, Krelthax began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's advanced acoustics, we gather today to address a problem that has plagued our peaceful confederation for far too long. The human species has proven itself to be incompatible with civilized galactic society. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. The Drachmori representatives, their warrior culture evident in their scarred armor and battle-hardened faces, nodded approvingly. General Vexstar, the Drachmori military leader, had been pushing for this decision for months. The crystalline beings of the Vorthan Confederation chimed in harmony, their glass-like bodies resonating with approval. Humans expand too quickly, Krelthax continued, his voice growing stronger. They colonize worlds without proper authorization. They interfere in conflicts that do not concern them. They create technologies that disrupt our established order. Most concerning of all, they refuse to follow the protocols that have kept peace in our galaxy for 1,000 years. In the human section of the Great Hall, Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly with his small diplomatic team. His weathered face showed no emotion as he listened to the accusations. Beside him, Dr. Susan Clark, the human cultural attaché, made notes on her tablet. The third member of their team, Commander Bill Turner, kept his hands folded in his lap, though his jaw was tight with controlled anger. Jake had seen this coming for months. The signs had been there in every diplomatic meeting, every trade negotiation, every request for aid that had been met with suspicion rather than gratitude. The galaxy's elder species had grown comfortable in their established ways and humanities. Rapid expansion and innovation made them nervous. The humans claim they are explorers, Krelthax said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. But we have seen their true nature. They are conquerors who smile while they take what they want. They are barbarians who have learned to wear the mask of civilization. The Andromedan delegate, a peaceful species known for their philosophical nature, raised a tentative appendage. Ambassador Krelthax, surely we should consider the positive contributions humans have made. Their medical advances have saved countless lives. Their agricultural techniques have ended famines on 12 worlds. Their defensive technologies have protected many of our border systems. Krelthax's golden eyes narrowed. You speak of their so-called contributions, but at what cost? Every human innovation comes with strings attached. They demand payment, they require access to our worlds, they insist on placing their people in positions of influence. This is not generosity, it is conquest by another name. General Vexstar of the Drachmori Empire stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across several rows of delegates. The Zephyrian speaks truth, he rumbled in his deep voice. My people are warriors, and we recognize other warriors when we see them. The humans hide their aggressive nature behind false smiles and diplomatic words, but we have seen their military capabilities. They build weapons that could destroy entire fleets, and they claim these weapons are for defense only. The Drachmori. General raises an important point, Krelthax agreed. Human military technology far exceeds what any single species should possess. They have developed faster-than-light travel that surpasses our own, energy weapons that can pierce our strongest shields, and defensive systems that make their colonies nearly impregnable. This is not the behavior of a peaceful species. Jake. Morrison finally stood up, his movement causing a hush to fall over the chamber. Even those who opposed humanity respected the quiet dignity of the human diplomat. His gray hair and lined face spoke of decades spent in service to both his species and the galactic community. May I respond to these accusations? Jake asked. His voice calm and measured. Krel, single quotes, Jex gestured dismissively. Of course. We would not want it said that the Council denied humans the right to speak in their own defense. Jake walked to the center of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He looked around at the faces of species he had worked with for 20 years, beings he had considered friends and allies. The disappointment in his eyes was clear to anyone who cared to look. "Honorable delegates," Jake began, "I have served as a human representative to this council for 2 decades. In that time, I have seen my people respond to every request for aid, every call for help, every crisis that threatened galactic peace. When the Corvan pirates attacked Andromedan merchant ships, it was human patrol vessels that drove them away. When the crop plague threatened to destroy the Tau Ceti colonies, it was human scientists who developed a cure. When the Shadowkin Empire pressed against our borders, it was human soldiers who held the line." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "You speak of human expansion as if it were conquest, but every human colony was established in empty systems, or on worlds that no other species wanted. You fear our military technology, but that same technology has protected this council's member worlds from threats you choose to ignore. You accuse us of being aggressive, but I challenge you to name a single instance where humans initiated conflict with a council member." The chamber fell silent. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up to answer Jake's challenge. "I see," Jake said quietly. "No examples of human aggression, because there are none. You fear us not because we are conquerors, but because we are different. We solve problems instead of debating them endlessly. We act when action is needed. Instead of forming committees, we innovate instead of following ancient protocols." Krelthax's scales darkened with anger. "Your words prove our point, human. You show no respect for our traditions, no understanding of the delicate balance that keeps peace in our galaxy. You are chaos wrapped in the appearance of order." Jake nodded slowly. "Then you have made your decision. What do you want from us?" The Zephyrian ambassador spread his 6 arms wide. "The Galactic Council hereby orders the human species to withdraw from all territories, colonies, and installations outside your home system. You have 180 standard days to complete this withdrawal. Any human presence beyond the Sol system after that deadline will be considered an act of aggression against the Council." The vote was swift and decisive. 167 species voted in favor of expulsion. Only 28 voted against, and most of those were smaller species that had directly benefited from human aid. The 5 abstentions came from species that were too afraid to oppose the Council's majority. Jake Morrison looked around the chamber one final time. He saw satisfaction on most faces, relief on others, and shame on a precious few. He gathered his small team and walked toward the exit, his shoulders straight and his head held high. As they reached the doorway, Krelthax called out behind them, "Do not think this is personal, humans. This is simply business. The galaxy will be more peaceful without your disruptive presence." Jake stopped and turned back. "Ambassador Krelthax, I hope you are right. I truly hope the galaxy will be safer without us." As human delegates left the chamber and the great doors sealed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the hall, the remaining species began to celebrate their victory, confident that they had solved their problems by removing the troublesome humans from their midst. None of them noticed the small, worried group of Andromedan delegates who sat in silence, or the crystalline collective representatives who had begun to dim with concern. They were too busy congratulating themselves on their wisdom to pay attention to the few voices that wondered what they had just done. The galaxy had spoken, and humanity had been found wanting. The age of human expansion and influence was over, or so they believed. The consequences of their decision would take time to manifest, but when they did, the laughter would turn to screams, and the galaxy would learn the true cost of their choice. 6 months had passed since the last human transport ship disappeared beyond the edge of known space. The Galactic Council had expected immediate improvements in their peaceful confederation. Instead, the first signs of trouble began to appear. Like cracks in a dam that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Captain Veltar of the Andromedan merchant vessel Peaceful Journey was the first to report the new reality. His ship had been traveling the Kepler trade route, a path that connected 12 different star systems and had been one of the safest passages in the galaxy. The route had always been protected by regular human patrol ships that kept pirates and raiders away from merchant vessels. Now those patrol ships were gone, and the Corvan Syndicate had moved in to fill the empty space. 3 ships attacked us near the Vega system, Veltar reported to the Andromedan Trade Council. His usually calm demeanor was shaken, and his large black eyes showed the strain of the encounter. They demanded half our cargo as payment for safe passage. When we refused, they disabled our engines and took everything anyway. The Trade Council members looked at each other with growing concern. Elder Morden, the oldest member of their governing body, spoke first. This is unfortunate, but surely an isolated incident. The Corvan pirates have always been a problem in the outer systems. No, Elder, Veltar replied firmly, this was different. They had new ships, better weapons, and they knew our exact cargo manifest. They said they now controlled the entire Kepler route and that all merchants would pay tribute or face destruction. Similar reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The Crystalline Collective discovered that their mining operations on Gamma Centauri had become far less efficient. The innovative extraction techniques that human engineer Paul Davis had developed were too complex for the local alien workforce to replicate properly. Administrator Zixal stared at the production reports with growing frustration. The numbers were clear and undeniable. We are producing 40% less refined crystal than we were 7 months ago, he announced to the Collective Council. The extraction equipment requires constant adjustments that only the human engineer understood. Surely our own people can learn these techniques, suggested Council Member Fluxon. We are not inferior to humans in intelligence. It is not about intelligence, Zixal replied, his crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. The human engineer had an intuitive understanding of how the equipment worked. He could sense problems before they became critical failures. He made thousands of small adjustments every day that kept the machines running at peak efficiency. The Collective had assumed that mining was simply a matter of following established procedures. They had not realized that human innovation had made their operations depend on constant creative problem-solving and adaptation on the agricultural world of Tau Ceti. The situation was becoming desperate. Dr. Helen Parker had been forced to abandon her research into plague-resistant crops when the human expulsion was announced. The Botanical Council had assured everyone that they could continue her work without difficulty. They were wrong. Council leader Thaindok examined the withered plants in the research facility with growing alarm. The new strain of crop blight is unlike anything we have seen before, he told his assembled scientists. It appears to be a mutation of the original plague that Dr. Parker was working to eliminate. What about her research notes? Asked Dr. Yulmak, the facility's head botanist. Surely she left detailed records of her work. She did, Thaindok replied grimly. But the notes assume knowledge that we do not possess. She references dozens of techniques and procedures that were apparently common knowledge among human scientists, but are completely foreign to us. The crop blight spread rapidly across Tau Ceti's agricultural zones. Without Dr. Parker's expertise, the local scientists could only watch helplessly as their food production declined week by week. The planet that had once exported food to 12 different star systems now faced the possibility of widespread famine. The Zephyrian Federation, which had led the campaign to expel humanity, began to face problems of their own. Their border worlds had always been protected by an early warning system that human engineers had installed and maintained. The system used a combination of sensor networks and artificial intelligence to detect potential threats from the dangerous Shadowkin Empire. Commander Rex Zolan of the Zephyrian Border Guard received the first troubling reports from his forward observation posts. Sir, we are detecting unusual movement in the Shadowkin territories, reported Lieutenant Kexmar. Our sensors show increased military activity along their border with our space. Have you analyzed the threat level? Rex Zolan asked. That is the problem, sir. The human-designed analysis systems have been malfunctioning for weeks. We can see that something is happening, but we cannot determine what it means or how dangerous it might be. The early warning system had been so reliable for so long that the Zephyrians had never bothered to learn how it worked. They had simply trusted that it would continue to function without human supervision. Now, as the complex artificial intelligence systems began to fail without proper maintenance, The Federation found itself blind to the growing threat on their borders. The Drakmori Empire, which had strongly supported the human expulsion, discovered that their military effectiveness was declining rapidly. Their warrior culture had always prized strength and combat skill, but they had quietly relied on human-designed weapons and armor. To maintain their superiority over other species, General Vextar stood in the Empire's main armory, examining the weapon systems that had made his people feared throughout the galaxy. "How long before our current equipment becomes unusable?" he asked his chief armorer. "The energy weapons will continue to function for perhaps another year," Armorer Drakethan replied. "But the power cells that the human engineer Tony Rogers designed are already showing signs of degradation. Without his expertise, we cannot manufacture replacements." "And the armor systems?" "Even worse, General. The adaptive plating requires constant recalibration to maintain its effectiveness. The human technicians handled this maintenance, but they took their knowledge with them when they left. The Drakmori had always seen themselves as the ultimate warriors, but they were beginning to realize that their success had depended heavily on human innovation and support. Without access to human technology, they were becoming just another species with conventional weapons and basic armor, the Vorthan. Confederation began to experience internal conflicts that had been dormant for decades. The Confederation was composed of 7 different species that had historically been enemies. Human diplomatic protocols and mediation techniques had been the key to keeping these fractious groups working together peacefully, Ambassador. Lindell of the Vorthan Central Council received reports of fighting breaking out on 3 different member worlds. "The Calarian and Mortian populations are clashing again," she reported to the Emergency Council session. "The dispute is over. Mining rights that were settled by human mediation 5 years ago." "What about the original agreement?" asked Council Member Vexan. "The Calarians claim the humans made promises that were not recorded in the official documents. The Mortians say the humans made contradictory promises to them. Without the human mediators to clarify what was actually agreed upon, both sides believe they are being cheated." The human diplomatic approach had been based on finding creative solutions that satisfied all parties, often through complex arrangements that required ongoing management and adjustment. The Vorthan legal system, which was based on rigid precedent and formal procedures, could not replicate the flexible problem-solving that had kept the Confederation together. As reports of problems poured in from across the galaxy, a few species began to question whether the human expulsion had been a mistake. The Andromedans, who had always been philosophical and thoughtful, were the first to openly express doubts. "Perhaps we acted too hastily," suggested Elder Morden during a private council session. "The humans may have been disruptive, but they were also effective at solving problems." "You cannot mean that we should ask them to return," replied Council Member Terevin. "The vote was clear. The majority of the galaxy wanted them gone." "The majority of the galaxy may have been wrong," Morden said quietly. "We are beginning to see that human involvement in our affairs was not conquest, but cooperation. They did not take from us, they gave to us, but such doubts were still minority opinions. Most species preferred to believe that the problems they were experiencing were temporary difficulties that would resolve themselves with time. The Galactic Council issued statements assuring everyone that the initial disruption from the human departure was normal and expected." Ambassador Krelthax, who had led the expulsion campaign, dismissed the growing concerns. "Every major change creates temporary instability," he announced to the Council. "These minor problems will be resolved as we adapt to our new circumstances. The galaxy is stronger without human interference." However, in the private moments when no one was watching, even Krelthax found himself wondering if they had made the right choice. The problems were not getting better with time. If anything, they seemed to be getting worse. 2 years had passed since the human expulsion, and the galaxy was beginning to understand the true cost of their decision. What had started as minor inconveniences had grown into major crises that threatened the stability of entire star systems. The Corvin Syndicate had transformed from a small group of pirates into a powerful organization that controlled 3 major trade routes. Their leader, a ruthless alien named Vexmore, had built his growing empire on the foundations of abandoned human patrol stations and defensive networks. "The trade routes are ours now," Lexmore announced to his assembled captains aboard his flagship Dark Reaper. The soft merchants will pay us for safe passage, or they will lose their ships and their lives. Captain Vraketel, one of his most trusted raiders, raised a concern. The Galactic Council has been sending protest messages about our activities. They threaten to send military forces to stop us. Lexmore laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the ship's bridge. Let them send their forces. The humans were the only ones who could challenge us effectively. The Council's military is weak and divided. They cannot coordinate their efforts well enough to threaten us. The pirate leader was right. The Galactic Council's military response had been pathetic. Different species used different communication systems, different tactical approaches, and different weapons. The human military advisors had been the ones who helped coordinate joint operations between alien forces. Without them, the Council's military was unable to mount an effective response to the growing pirate threat. The Galactic Trade Commission released statistics that shocked even the most optimistic observers. Piracy-related losses had increased by 300%. Insurance costs for merchant vessels had risen so high that many smaller trading companies were going out of business. The economic impact was spreading throughout the galaxy like a disease. The Drakmori Empire, once the most feared military force in the galaxy, was facing a crisis that threatened their entire way of life. Their warrior culture was based on the belief that strength and courage were the only things that mattered in battle. They were learning that technology and innovation were equally important. General Vexstar stood in the ruins of what had once been a proud Drakmori military base. The Shadowkin Empire had attacked 3 border worlds simultaneously, and the Drakmori forces had been unable to stop them. Their weapons had failed at critical moments, their armor had proven inadequate against Shadowkin energy weapons, and their communication systems had broken down under the stress of battle. How many ships did we lose? Vexstar asked his aide, Commander Lockmar. 47 vessels destroyed, sir. Another 31 damaged beyond repair. The Shadowkin lost only 12 ships in the entire engagement. The numbers were devastating. The Drakmori military had always prided itself on never losing more ships than their enemies. Now they were suffering losses at a rate that would destroy their entire fleet within months if the trend continued. What about our intelligence networks? Vexstar asked. Do we know what the Shadowkin are planning next? The early warning systems are still malfunctioning, sir. The human-designed sensors worked perfectly for years, but without proper maintenance, they are becoming increasingly unreliable. We can detect enemy movements, but we cannot predict their intentions or their likely targets. The Drakmori had always despised the idea of depending on anyone else for their military effectiveness. They were learning that their independence had been an illusion. Without human technological support, they were becoming just another weak species in a galaxy full of threats. On the agricultural world of Kepler 186F, the situation had become desperate. The crop blight that had started on Tau Ceti had spread to 17 different worlds, and the local scientists were powerless to stop it. The disease seemed to adapt to every treatment they tried, becoming stronger and more resistant with each passing month. Dr. Colvin, the planet's chief agricultural scientist, stared at the withered fields that stretched to the horizon. The blight has now infected 60% of our food crops, he reported to the Planetary Council. If we cannot find a solution within the next few months, we will face widespread famine. What about requesting aid from other worlds? Suggested Council Member Yurdok. We have tried, but the problem is spreading faster than anyone anticipated. The worlds that might have helped us are now dealing with their own crop failures. The Botanical Council of Tau Ceti has completely collapsed. They are evacuating their population to other star systems. The agricultural crisis was creating a cascade effect throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had once been self-sufficient were now competing for limited food supplies. Prices for basic necessities were rising rapidly, and social unrest was beginning to appear on planets that had been stable for generations. The Vorthan Confederation was fragmenting as old ethnic and territorial disputes resurfaced. The 7-member species had been held together by careful human diplomatic work that had balanced competing interests and managed ancient grievances. Without that stabilizing influence, the Confederation was falling apart. Ambassador Lindell, received reports of violence on 5 different member worlds. The Calarian separatists have declared independence from the Confederation, she announced to the Emergency Council session. They claim that the central government has been favoring the Martian population in resource allocation decisions. Can we negotiate with them? Asked Councilmember Tevin. We have tried, but our diplomatic protocols are inadequate for this type of crisis. The humans had developed specialized techniques for managing interspecies conflicts. They understood how to find compromises that satisfied all parties. Our traditional methods only work when both sides are willing to accept formal legal solutions. The Calarian independence movement was inspiring similar separatist groups among other Confederation species. The Zorthek population was demanding their own autonomous region, and the Velmar were threatening to withdraw from the Confederation entirely if their territorial claims were not recognized, the Zephyrian Federation, which had led the campaign to expel humanity, was discovering that their border security had been completely dependent on human technology and expertise. The Shadowkin Empire had been probing their defenses for months, and the Federation's military was unable to determine the enemy's true intentions. Commander Rexolin of the Border Guard received intelligence reports that painted a terrifying picture. The Shadowkin have massed a fleet of over 200 ships near our border, he reported to the Federation High Command. Our sensors indicate they are preparing for a major offensive operation. What are their likely targets? Asked Admiral Klexvar. We cannot determine that from our current intelligence. The human-designed analysis systems could predict enemy behavior patterns, but those systems have been failing for months. We can see what the Shadowkin are doing, but we cannot understand what it means. The Shadowkin had been contained for decades by a combination of human military presence and diplomatic pressure. The human strategy had been to maintain just enough strength to deter aggression while offering economic incentives for peaceful behavior. The Zephyrians had no understanding of how to manage such a complex relationship. The Crystalline Collective was facing an economic disaster as their mining operations continued to decline. The sophisticated extraction equipment that had made them wealthy was breaking down without proper maintenance, and their attempts to reverse engineer human innovations had failed completely. Administrator Zixal stood in the main control center of their largest mining facility, watching displays that showed steadily declining production numbers. We are now producing less than half of our pre-expulsion output, he announced to the collective leadership. Several of our major clients have canceled their contracts and found alternative suppliers. What about the human engineers' technical manuals? Asked Councilmember Fluxon. Surely we can learn from his documentation. The manuals assume knowledge that we do not possess, Zixal replied. They reference techniques and procedures that were apparently common knowledge among human engineers, but are completely foreign to us. It is like trying to learn advanced mathematics without understanding basic arithmetic. The collective had built their entire economy around technologies they did not truly understand. Without human expertise, they were watching their civilization's foundations crumble. The Andromedan species, who had always been philosophical and thoughtful, were among the first to openly question the wisdom of the human expulsion. Elder Morden called for a special session of the Andromedan Council to address the growing crisis. We made a terrible mistake, Morden announced to the assembled council members. The humans were not conquerors or troublemakers. They were the glue that held our galactic civilization together. Without them, we are falling apart. You suggest we should contact them? Asked Councilmember Terevin. I suggest we should try, Morden replied. We need to swallow our pride and admit that we were wrong. The galaxy needs human innovation, human problem-solving, and human protection, but such voices were still in the minority. Most species preferred to believe that they could solve their problems without human help. 5 years had passed since the human expulsion, and the galaxy was drowning in chaos. What had once been a peaceful confederation of species working together had become a collection of desperate civilizations fighting for survival. The problems that had started as minor inconveniences had grown into existential threats that challenged the very foundation of galactic society. The Shadowkin Empire had expanded their territory by consuming 12 star systems that had previously been under Galactic Council protection. Their dark ships moved through space like a plague, converting every world they conquered into factory planets that produced more weapons and more ships for their endless war machine, Shadowkin. Commander Vorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, Death's Herald, as it approached another defenseless world. The planet below had once been protected by human-designed defensive platforms and early warning systems. Now, those defenses lay in ruins, abandoned and unmaintained since the human departure. "Begin the orbital bombardment," Vorthak commanded his weapons officer. "Focus on the population centers first, then the industrial complexes. We want the survivors to understand that resistance is futile." The planet's government had sent desperate pleas for help to the Galactic Council, but no aid had come. The Council's military forces were scattered and uncoordinated. Without human military advisors to help plan joint operations, the various alien fleets could not work together effectively enough to challenge the Shadowkin advance. "Sir, we are receiving surrender transmissions from the planetary government," reported the communications officer. "Ignore them," Vorthak replied coldly. "The Shadowkin Empire does not accept surrender. We require complete submission or total destruction. Begin landing operations once the bombardment is complete." The Shadowkin had learned to exploit the weaknesses that human departure had created. They targeted worlds that had depended on human protection, struck at trade routes that human patrols had once secured, and used technologies salvaged from abandoned human installations to improve their own weapons and ships, the Drakmori Empire. Once the most feared military force in the galaxy was facing complete collapse. Their proud warrior culture was crumbling as defeat followed. Defeat in an unending series of humiliating losses. General Vexstar received the latest battle reports in his command bunker deep beneath the Drakmori homeworld. The numbers were catastrophic. "We have lost another fleet engagement," he told his assembled officers. "The Shadowkin destroyed 8 of our ships while losing only 3 of their own. How is this possible?" demanded Commander Lockmar. "Our warriors are still the best? Trained in the galaxy, our courage has not diminished." "Courage is not enough," Vexstar replied bitterly. "The enemy has superior weapons, better armor, and more effective communication systems. Our equipment fails at critical moments because we do not have the human engineers who designed it. Our strategies fail because we do not have the human tactical advisors who helped us plan complex operations." The Drakmori military had always prided itself on never asking for help from anyone. They were learning that their independence had been an illusion created by their dependence on human support. Without human technology and expertise, they were being crushed by enemies they had once dominated easily. "What about our intelligence networks?" Vexstar asked. "Do we at least know where the Shadowkin will strike next?" "The early warning systems are completely unreliable now," reported Intelligence Officer Drakvin. "We can detect enemy fleet movements, but we cannot predict their targets or their timing. The human-designed analysis programs worked for years without problems, but they have been degrading steadily since the humans left." The irony was bitter and inescapable. The Drakmori had supported the human expulsion because they had feared human military capabilities. Now they were being destroyed by enemies who were using weapons and technologies salvaged from abandoned human installations. The Zephyrian Federation was watching its capital world come under direct attack. The Shadowkin fleet that had been massing near their border had finally struck, and the Federation's defenses were proving completely inadequate to stop them. Ambassador Krelthax stood in the Federation's emergency command center, watching displays that showed enemy ships approaching the homeworld's orbital defenses. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. He had led the campaign to expel humanity from the galaxy, and now he was watching his own world burn because of that decision. "How long can our defenses hold?" he asked General Morthak, the Federation's military commander. "Perhaps 6 hours," the general replied grimly. "The orbital platforms are using obsolete weapons that cannot penetrate Shadowkin armor. Our fighter squadrons are being destroyed faster than we can launch them." "What about evacuation?" "We do not have enough transport ships to evacuate even a small fraction of the population. The human merchant marine used to provide emergency transportation services, but they are no longer available to us." Krelthax closed his eyes as he listened to the sounds of battle raging in orbit above his world. The human defensive strategies and technologies that he had dismissed as primitive had been the only thing standing between civilization and the Shadowkin hordes. Without them, the galaxy was defenseless. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Kelvar, "we are receiving a message from the Andromedan Council. They are requesting permission to contact the humans for emergency assistance." Kralfax felt his scales flush with shame. The species he had worked so hard to expel were now their only hope for survival. But he had made that hope impossible to reach. The Andromedan Council had finally overcome their pride and decided to attempt contact with humanity. Elder Morden had convinced his fellow council members that swallowing their dignity was preferable to watching their civilization die. "We must try to reach them," Morden argued at the emergency council session. "The humans may be angry with us, but they are not a cruel species. If we explain the situation and ask for their help, they might be willing to assist us." "What if they refuse?" asked Councilmember Terevin. "What if they tell us that we made our choice and must live with the consequences?" "Then we will face extinction with the knowledge that we tried everything possible," Morden replied. "But I do not believe they will refuse. The humans had many faults, but abandoning innocent people to genocide was never one of them." The Andromedan diplomatic mission approached the edge of the Sol system in a small, unarmed vessel. They had sent messages ahead announcing their peaceful intentions and requesting permission to meet with human representatives. They were met by Admiral Rick Hansen aboard the massive battleship Terra Nova. The human ship was unlike anything the Andromedans had seen before. Its sleek design and advanced weaponry suggested that humanity had made significant technological advances during their years of isolation. Admiral Hansen was an older man now, his hair completely gray and his face lined with the stress of commanding humanity's defense forces. He received the Andromedan delegation in his ship's conference room, his manner polite but distant. "Ambassador Veltar," Hansen said as he greeted the Andromedan representative, "I must admit I am surprised to see you here. The last time we spoke, your people were voting to expel us from the galaxy." Veltar's large black eyes showed shame and desperation. "Admiral Hansen, I come before you to admit that we were wrong. The galaxy is dying without human protection and assistance. The Shadowkin Empire has expanded across dozens of star systems. The Corvan pirates control the major trade routes. Agricultural plagues are causing famine on hundreds of worlds. Military alliances are collapsing and entire civilizations are facing extinction." Hansen listened without expression as Veltar described the chaos that had consumed the galaxy. When the ambassador finished his report, the human admiral was quiet for a long moment. "You are asking us to return and save the galaxy that rejected us," Hansen finally said. "You want us to risk human lives to protect the species that voted to exile us from our own colonies and territories." "I know we have no right to ask," Veltar replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "We treated you with suspicion and hostility when you deserved respect and gratitude. We expelled you from the galaxy when we should have been thanking you for your service. But if there is any mercy left in humanity, please help us." Hansen stood up and walked to the conference room's large viewport, looking out at the stars beyond. "Ambassador Veltar, I want you to understand something about humanity. We did not leave the galaxy because we were angry or hurt, although we were both of those things. We left because you made it clear that our presence was not wanted." The Admiral turned back to face the alien diplomat. "For 5 years, we have focused on our own survival and development. We have built new technologies, established new colonies within our own territory, and created defensive systems that make our space virtually impenetrable. We have thrived in isolation." "Then you will not help us?" Veltar asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hansen was quiet for another long moment. "I will present your request to President Carter and the Human Space Command. We will consider your situation and determine whether humanity has any obligation to intervene in galactic affairs." The Andromedan delegation returned to their ship, carrying with them a glimmer of hope but no promises. 7 years had passed since the human expulsion, and the galaxy stood on the edge of complete destruction. The Shadowkin Empire had grown into an unstoppable force that consumed everything in its path, leaving behind only factory worlds and slave populations. Half of the known galaxy now belonged to the Dark Empire, and their advance showed no signs of slowing. The remnants of the Galactic Council met in emergency session on Sanctuary Prime, one of the few heavily fortified worlds that still remained free. The once proud assembly hall that had housed representatives from 200 species now held delegates from fewer than 60 civilizations. The rest had either been conquered by the Shadowkin or had fled to distant corners of the galaxy. Elder Morden of the Andromedans stood before the desperate assembly, his aged form trembling with exhaustion and fear. Fellow delegates, I bring news from our intelligence networks that confirms our worst fears. The Shadowkin have developed new weapons, using technology they salvaged from abandoned human installations. The revelation sent waves of shock and horror through the assembled representatives. The irony was devastating. The defensive systems that humans had built to protect the galaxy were now being used to destroy it. What kind of weapons? Asked the crystalline collective representative, her voice barely audible through her species' harmonic communication system. Planet killers, Morden replied grimly. The Shadowkin have reverse-engineered human defensive platforms and converted them into orbital bombardment systems capable of destroying entire worlds. They used these weapons to eliminate the Vorthan homeworld 3 days ago. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this terrible news. The Vorthan Confederation had been one of the oldest and most stable governments in the galaxy. If they could be wiped out in a single attack, no one was safe. The few remaining Vorthan delegates sat in stunned silence, their entire civilization reduced to a handful of refugee ships scattered across space. Ambassador Lindahl, her voice broken with grief, spoke for her dying people. 15 billion souls lived on our homeworld. The Shadowkin bombardment lasted only 6 hours. Nothing remains but molten rock and radioactive debris. Commander Rex Olin of the Zephyrian Border Guard delivered an equally devastating report. The Shadowkin war machine has adapted human manufacturing techniques to increase their production capabilities. Our intelligence estimates suggest they are now building ships and weapons faster than our combined forces can destroy them. The assembled delegates looked at each other with growing despair. Every report brought worse news, and every proposed solution seemed inadequate to address the scale of the crisis they faced. What about the human response to our request for aid? Asked General Dracomore, one of the few surviving Dracomori commanders. The Andromedans made contact with them months ago. Elder Morden's expression grew even more somber. Admiral Hansen has agreed to meet with a larger delegation to discuss the possibility of human intervention. However, he made it clear that humanity has no obligation to help the galaxy that expelled them. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, humanity had been watching the galactic crisis unfold with careful attention. President Lisa Carter sat in the Oval Office with her senior advisors, reviewing intelligence reports that painted a picture of unprecedented destruction across the galaxy. The Shadowkin advance has accelerated significantly, reported intelligence. Director Carl Johnson. They have conquered 18 star systems in the past month alone. At this rate, they will control the entire galaxy within 2 years. What about their military capabilities? Asked Secretary of Defense Nancy Williams. They have reverse-engineered many of our abandoned technologies and adapted them for offensive purposes. The defensive platforms we left behind are now being used as planet-killing weapons. The early warning systems we installed are helping them coordinate their attacks more effectively. President Carter reviewed the detailed reports with growing concern. The galaxy that had rejected humanity was facing extinction, and the technologies that humans had developed to protect civilization were now being used to destroy it. Admiral Hansen entered the meeting room, his uniform bearing the insignia of his new rank as Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces. Madam President, I have completed my analysis of the galactic situation. The crisis is worse than anything we anticipated when we were expelled. What are your recommendations, Admiral? Carter asked. The Shadowkin represent a threat not just to the current galactic civilizations, but potentially to humanity as well. If they succeed in conquering the entire galaxy, they will eventually turn their attention to the Sol system. Our defensive capabilities are formidable, but they may not be sufficient to stop an empire that controls the resources of an entire galaxy. The President nodded thoughtfully. What about the alien request for assistance? The Andromedans and their allies are desperate. They have admitted their mistakes and are begging for our help. The question is whether we have any moral obligation to assist them, and whether such assistance would be in humanity's best interests. Secretary Williams raised a critical point. Our isolation has allowed us to develop technologies that are far advanced beyond anything the aliens possess. If we intervene, we risk exposing these capabilities to potential enemies. On the other hand, Admiral Hansen replied, if we allow the galaxy to fall to the Shadowkin, we may face a much more dangerous enemy in the future, the Shadowkin Empire. Armed with the resources of an entire galaxy would be a threat that even our advanced defenses might not be able to stop. Dr. Helen Parker, the former xenobiologist who had been forced to abandon her research on Tau Ceti, attended the meeting. As an advisor on alien affairs, I have been monitoring communications from the affected worlds. The agricultural plagues that started after my departure have spread to over 300 planets. Billions of people are facing starvation even in areas not yet conquered by the Shadowkin. The human leadership faced an impossible decision. The galaxy that had expelled them was dying, and only humanity had the power to save it. But intervention would require risking human lives to protect the species that had rejected them. President Carter stood up and walked to the window overlooking the rebuilt Washington, D.C. skyline. The past 7 years had been a period of unprecedented growth and innovation for humanity. Free from the constraints of galactic politics, human scientists and engineers had made breakthrough discoveries that revolutionized everything from energy production to space travel. Admiral Hansen, I want you to prepare Operation Sanctuary, the President finally said. We will establish an impenetrable defensive barrier around our entire sphere of influence. If the galaxy falls to the Shadowkin, humanity will survive in isolation and the alien request for assistance? Hansen asked. We will consider it, but humanity's survival is our first priority. We cannot save a galaxy that rejected us if doing so would destroy our own civilization. The final desperate plea came from an unexpected source. Vexmore, the leader of the Corvan Syndicate, sent a message directly to the Sol System. The pirate warlord who had built his empire on the chaos, following human departure, now faced extinction at the hands of the Shadowkin. Humans, Vexmore's message began, I know we are your enemies. My people have attacked your former allies and profited from the chaos your departure created. But even pirates deserve to live, and the Shadowkin will spare no one. If there is any mercy in your species, please help us. The message was broadcast across all human worlds, and citizens held vigils in public squares to debate whether their species should intervene. The moral weight of the decision was enormous. Humanity had the power to save billions of lives, but those lives belonged to species that had expelled them from the galaxy. Admiral Hansen received authorization to begin preliminary preparations for a potential intervention. Operation Closed Door would seal humanity off from the galaxy permanently, while Operation Guardian Angel would involve massive military intervention to stop the Shadowkin advance. The choice we make now will define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come, Hansen told his senior staff. We can choose isolation and safety, or we can choose intervention and risk. Either way, we will have to live with the consequences. The countdown had begun. Humanity had the technology and military power to save the galaxy, but the question remained whether they would choose to use it. The species that had laughed as humans left now waited in desperate hope for their return, knowing that their survival depended entirely on the mercy of the people they had wronged. The moment of truth had arrived. Deep space sensors detected the massive Shadowkin armada approaching the edge of human space, their dark ships blotting out the stars like a swarm of metal locusts. The alien empire had grown tired of waiting, and decided to eliminate the last major obstacle to their total galactic conquest. President Lisa Carter stood in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. The numbers were staggering. Over 10,000 Shadowkin vessels, including planet-killer ships armed with weapons reverse-engineered from abandoned human technology, were moving toward the Sol System with obvious hostile intent. They are not responding to our diplomatic communications, reported Admiral Hansen. The Shadowkin Empire appears to have decided that humanity represents a threat that must be eliminated. How long before they reach our outer defensive perimeter? Carter asked. 18 hours at their current speed, replied the Admiral. However, our long-range scans indicate they are carrying enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. This is not a raid or a probe. This is an invasion force designed to wipe us out completely. The irony was bitter and complete. The galaxy that had spelled humanity for being too aggressive was now being destroyed by an empire that would not stop until everything was enslaved or dead. The species that had feared human expansion were facing extinction at the hands of true conquerors. As the human leadership prepared for the greatest battle in their history, something unexpected happened. The surviving members of the Galactic Council, led by a humbled Ambassador Krelfax, arrived at the edge of human space in a ragtag collection of refugee ships. Admiral Hansen, came the transmission from Krelfax's vessel, we do not come. As representatives of the Galactic Council, for that body no longer exists. We come as the last survivors of our civilizations, begging for sanctuary from the storm we helped create. The Zephyrian ambassador, who had once led the campaign to expel humanity, now spoke with a voice broken by shame and desperation. We were fools to fear you. We thought we were expelling troublemakers, but we were banishing our guardians. The galaxy is dying because we drove away the only people capable of protecting it. President Carter authorized Admiral Hansen to respond to the alien refugees. The Admiral's message was broadcast across all the surviving alien ships, carrying the weight of humanity's final decision. Ambassador Krelfax, 7 years ago your people voted to expel us from the galaxy. You called us aggressive, primitive, and dangerous. You laughed as we departed, believing you had solved your problems by removing us from your midst. Hansen paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. You were right about one thing, we are dangerous. But you never understood that. We were dangerous to your enemies, not to you. We were the shield that stood between civilization and the darkness that sought to consume it. The alien delegates listened in silence as Hansen delivered humanity's judgment. We could allow you to face the consequences of your decision alone. We could seal our borders and watch as the Shadowkin complete their conquest of the galaxy. We would be justified in choosing our own survival over yours. Elder Morden of the Andromedans interrupted the transmission with a desperate plea. Admiral Hansen, we know we do not deserve your mercy. We know we have no right to ask for your help, but if there is any compassion left in humanity, please do not let billions of innocent people die for the mistakes their leaders made. Hansen's expression softened slightly as he heard the anguish in the elderly alien's voice. Elder Morden, you mistake our choice. This is not about mercy or compassion, though we have both. This is about who we are as a species. The Admiral turned to address all the refugee ships simultaneously. Humanity will not allow genocide to succeed, not because we owe you anything, but because watching innocent people die while we have the power to help them would make us no better than the Shadowkin themselves. As Hansen spoke, the first elements of the human defense fleet began emerging from hidden bases throughout the Sol system. The alien refugees watched in amazement as ship after ship appeared, each one incorporating technologies that seemed impossible even by their advanced standards. The flagship Humanity's Pride was a vessel larger than most space stations, its hull gleaming with energy shields that bent light around its edges. Escort ships phased in and out of normal space, their movement patterns suggesting they could manipulate space-time itself. Fighter squadrons moved in perfect coordination, their pilots connected by quantum communication links that allowed instantaneous coordination across vast distances. We have not been idle during our exile, Hansen continued his broadcast. Humanity has developed capabilities that would have been impossible while we were constrained by galactic politics and regulations. We have technologies that can redirect the energy of stars, weapons that can destabilize the fabric of space itself, and defensive systems that make our territory virtually impregnable. The Shadowkin Armada detected the emergence of the human fleet and immediately changed course to engage. Their commanders had expected to find a defensive force comparable to the alien militaries they had been crushing for years. Instead, they found themselves facing something completely unprecedented. The Battle of Sol began with the Shadowkin launching their planet-killer weapons at Earth itself. The massive energy beams that could destroy entire worlds struck humanity's defensive grid and simply disappeared, absorbed by technology that converted raw energy into power for even stronger defenses. Captain Amy Brooks, now commanding the battleship Terra's Fury, led the first wave of human ships into combat. Her vessel moved through space like a dancing star, its weapons reaching across impossible distances to strike enemy ships with pinpoint accuracy. "All vessels, execute Pattern 7, Brooks commanded. "Show them what happens when they threaten our home." The human ships moved with coordination that seemed almost supernatural. They phased through enemy fire, appeared behind Shadowkin vessels to deliver devastating attacks, and disappeared before return fire could reach them. The alien refugees watched in amazement as the human fleet dismantled the mighty Shadowkin. Armada with surgical precision, within 6 hours, the battle was over. The Shadowkin Empire's greatest fleet had been completely destroyed, with human losses numbering exactly 0. The technology gap between humanity and their enemies was so vast that the engagement had been less a battle than a demonstration, but the human response did not stop with defensive victory. Admiral Hansen authorized Operation Galactic Liberation, a massive offensive campaign designed to destroy the Shadowkin Empire completely and restore freedom to the conquered worlds. Human fleets appeared simultaneously throughout Shadowkin territory, their ships emerging from quantum tunnels that allowed instantaneous travel across galactic distances. The empire that had taken years to build was dismantled in a matter of days by technology that made their own capabilities seem primitive by comparison on the former Shadowkin capital world. The surviving alien populations watched in amazement as human ships descended from the sky carrying aid and medical supplies rather than weapons and chains. The liberation forces treated their former enemies with dignity and compassion, offering help to rebuild rather than demanding tribute or submission. Elder Morden stood on the bridge of humanities, pride as it entered orbit around the liberated Zephyrian homeworld. "Admiral Hansen, I do not understand. You had every right to leave us to our fate. Why did you choose to save us?" Hansen looked out at the recovering planet below, where human aid workers were already helping to rebuild the cities destroyed by Shadowkin bombardment. "Elder Morden, you expelled us because you feared what we might become. You were right to be cautious. With the power we now possess, we could easily become conquerors ourselves." The Admiral turned to face the alien diplomat. "But that is not who we are. We are guardians, not because anyone asked us to be, but because we choose to be. We protect the innocent not for reward or recognition, but because it is the right thing to do." In the aftermath of the liberation, the surviving alien species created a new galactic government called the Commonwealth of Free Worlds. Humanity was offered leadership of the new organization, but President Carter declined, suggesting instead that the Commonwealth be governed by representatives from all member species working together. "We will help you rebuild," Carter announced to the Galactic Assembly. "We will share our knowledge and protect you from future threats, but we will not rule over you. The galaxy belongs to all of us, and we must all have a voice in its future." The memorial erected on Luna bore a simple inscription that captured the lesson learned by the entire galaxy. They laughed as humans left, believing they had solved their problems. They learned too late that humanity had never been their problem, but their solution. The galaxy entered a new age of peace and prosperity, but humanity remained vigilant. They had learned that guardians are not born from gratitude or recognition, but from the simple moral choice to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. That choice, more than any weapon or technology, was what made humanity truly exceptional among the stars.